Okay. Welcome to Make Your Neck Happy webinar. So what I'm going to be talking about today is some simple strategies that you can use to address some issues you may or may not have in your neck. And the reason that I chose these couple of things that I wanted to talk about was because they're common things that I think people have a hard time with and get wrong, so to speak, or they learn something that could be useful, but the application doesn't pan out to be helpful. And I'm going to kind of dispel why that happens so often with these three things. So the three things that I wanted to answer today were why I don't teach chin tucks to my clients and what to do instead, why I don't teach neck stretches and what to do instead, and why I don't teach range of motion of the neck and what to do instead. So in order to understand the answers to these questions, we have to have a little bit of an understanding of our neck anatomy and what makes up our neck. And so I'll keep this brief, but I think that it's really important because this is why it makes sense, why any of this makes sense. And that's what the trouble I think people get into most often is they don't really understand what they're trying to do with the advice or the exercise or whatever it may be. And so they're not aware of what they're supposed to feel or what they're supposed to be targeting. And so they end up more often than not, sometimes making issues worse than better. So I want to show you the neck. So this is the front of the neck. So this guy is exactly how I'm sitting. This is the skull. This is the front. So this is about right here. And this is the back side. Okay, back of the skull. The pointy processes in the back are all the bones. Now, if you look at the side, this is the hyoid bone, which is here. If you look at the side, this is what I think is kind of brings home some of the issues that I'm going to talk about with these exercises. We have all these little, you can see that this is pretty intricate, right? So we have each bone, each cervical bone is stacked up on the next one. And the way that it's stacked up creates this sort of unique space and these unique joint connections that allow for all these sensitive structures to live in here, right? So between each space, there's a hole. And from each hole comes artery, nerve, vein, lymph vessels, ligament, muscle, joint, then muscles on the top. So you could, just by looking at this, you can see there's not a lot of room for error, right? So if I'm moving and doing things and I move the wrong way and I pinch something. Well, when you look at this, and this is a very rudimentary, I mean, this is real model, but this is, only showing bones and this small amount of things. There's so many layers here. It's very easy to see how things can go wrong and create an inflammation and create pain just really easily. So it's delicate. It's once something gets inflamed, it becomes very difficult to calm it down because every time we move, we kind of tend to re-inflame things. So I think it's helpful to see what this looks like inside. Now, we're supposed to normally have curves in the neck. So the way they've built this guy is, I'm trying to keep track of the timer here, but okay. So the way that the neck is supposed to be curved is you're supposed to have a curve in, lordosis, and then once you get to your upper back, you're supposed to have a curve out, kyphosis, and then once you get to your lower spine, you're supposed to curve in again into another lordosis. So arched, rounded, arched. So what happens is we tend to, when we have poor posture and poor control of our muscles and poor mobility in the joints, we tend to over exaggerate these curves, and we tend to have too much curve this way and too much curve this way. And then when you look at it now, you can see how that's very easy to kind of cause some compression and cause some irritation in those areas, because once we over exaggerate these curves too much, then we just get too much load on these structures. And so once we see that, this guy isn't as bendable as I would like him to be. But now this is kind of putting him back a little bit more ideal. So once we see how we're supposed to be and what happens when we get out of that good position. So when I pushed the bones into an over-exaggerated extra lordosis, or extra arching in the upper, extra lordosis, extra kyphosis, then you can see, now that you looked at the bones, that automatically is creating more load and more compression on all those structures that are right in the middle of the neck. So just by that simple, this whole slouching thing. So even though, we know that, don't slouch, but if you don't kind of have a reason or like a picture in your mind of what you're trying to do when you take yourself out of a slouch position, it's hard to comply with it, right? So that's the basics of what is going on there. So now that I know that, now that you know that, and you're thinking, all these little structures I named that can become irritated when we have a slouched posture, then we start to understand, when we have an exercise we're supposed to be doing, what might go wrong when we don't do it right. Okay, so then enters the chin tuck. Okay, so this is a classic exercise that has been taught and issued to millions of people forever and ever, many years, and I never quite understood why this was such a popular exercise, because number one, it hurts. And the reason it hurts very often for people is because they don't understand the starting point. They don't understand why they're doing this exercise, and they don't understand the starting point to initiate the exercise. So if we're not in an ideal position to start the exercise, it's probably not going to feel good. And we don't want to do exercises that intentionally don't feel good, but that's another subject. So for example, if the classic chin tuck exercise is take your chin and push it back, right? This is very classic. Chin tucks, right? I never liked the chin tuck, and I don't like the chin tuck because if I don't have perfect posture, for one thing, if I do a chin tuck from anywhere other than ideal posture, then it does not feel good to me. That hurts. That hurts somewhere. So I already know if I'm slouched down and then I try to pull my chin back, then I'm causing some kind of shearing or compression in this middle here. So the slouching kind of anchors this down, and then it's kind of causing this kind of issue. So that's the starting point of why I don't like to start with that. Oh boy, someone's texting me that they can't get in the link, but I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, so that's why the starting point of a chin tuck is not usually, if you don't understand how to get in an ideal position, then we could think about maybe pulling the chin back a little bit, because what we're trying to accomplish is getting the ear over the shoulder. So in order to get the ear over the shoulder, that's what everybody started doing, tuck the chin, tuck the chin. But if I'm already here, if I get in my tall position, I don't need to pull my chin back to get my ear over my shoulder. So then comes, you have to understand where your posture is and where you need to be in order to make the improvements on it. So instead of thinking, pull the chin back, because if I'm here, so the first thing is, if you come up tall as you can be, to even see where does your ear line up with your shoulder. Is it even forward that you need to think about pulling your chin back? Or does it correct itself once you bring your body in an upright position? So the exercise that I like to use when I'm thinking about trying to get my chin and my ear and my shoulder in a lined up position is vertical lengthening. So the thinking is different. So I don't think chin back. I think I want to vertically lengthen my body and lengthen my spine. So instead of thinking chin back this way, I think vertically lengthen my body. So I think about this ponytail analogy, or a little string on the back of my skull is being pulled straight up, and I'm thinking about that spot being gently pulled up. And then look what happens to my chin. My chin then falls into place. Now, as I do that, I want to think vertically lengthen. Okay. Back of neck goes up. And then look what happens to my pelvis. My pelvis naturally wants to rise up a little bit this way. So if I'm getting lazy and getting tired, instead of thinking chin back, that does not feel good. That doesn't correct anything. If I think vertically lengthen, back of skull coming up towards the ceiling, then everything starts to settle in more of a line to what my range of motion is capable. Then I'm going to think, I'm going to squeeze my shoulder blades gently down and back this way. So all I'm doing is making my muscles between my shoulder blades squeeze together just gently, like that. And then I'm going to tighten my abdominal muscles a little bit to get a little bit of stability from the center. Then that's where my starting point is. That's where ears should be as close to over the shoulder as possible, which should be as close to over top of the pelvis as possible. So then that's my starting point to think about, okay, now I can exercise in that position. Now maybe I can add some neck strengthening exercises to my starting position instead of doing a chin tuck, because I don't want to jam my joints. I don't want to shear my joints. They don't like shearing. So when joints get pulled back and forth like this, that's shearing. So I don't want that. So I just switch the thinking to vertical lengthening, and then see where the puzzle pieces land. Then work from there. Now, many people can't get into a perfectly aligned position when they think vertically lengthened. They can only get so far. You can only get as far as your joints and your muscles will let you. But even knowing where that point is a starting point. So that's my kind of take on chin tucks. I'm going to start that over. So think vertical lengthening. That's the activity. That's the exercise. In a sitting position and a standing position, in the car, at your desk, think periodically, how can I raise my back of my skull gently up towards the ceiling? So moving on to neck stretches. Okay, so neck stretches, another very common commonly prescribed treatment for neck pain or neck stiffness. And a typical, like the most commonly discussed or talked about stretches are upper trap stretch and levator stretch, which are something like you tip and turn and hold and pull. That would be like an upper trap stretch. And a levator stretch would be you turn and look and reach over and lean and pull. And the reason I don't give these out to people, at least in the beginning of understanding what their issues are, is because similar reason. The punchline is similar, because they don't understand what they're supposed to be feeling. 100% of the time, the next time I see the person and I say, can you show me those 2 stretches that we did? They do it wrong, or they do it in a way that's not as effective as it could be, or worse, they do it in a way that is making their issue worse instead of better. So it never seems to pay off to instruct somebody in those exercises right away, because they don't get what they're supposed to be getting out of it. So what to do instead is understand what you're supposed to be feeling with these exercises. So I'm going to teach you right now what you're supposed to feel with these exercises, so that you have a concept of what is a neck stretch supposed to feel like. And so the same reason as with the chin tucks, like it's important to understand where you're supposed to feel stretching, because if you don't feel stretching in the right place, or the right type of stretch, you're likely causing compression on some joints that don't really want to be compressed, on either joint surfaces or disc or nerve, or something that really is not good to compress it. So knowing the difference is the first step in knowing whether or not these types of muscle stretches are even good for you. And you have to have enough joint flexibility to even stretch a muscle. So in other words, and knowing nobody really knows that. You have to kind of understand, you have to be taught a little bit about how your body works, how your neck works, in order to even know if you're stretching a joint or stretching a muscle. So I'm going to use these 2 examples to talk about how to know, and you can actually do it with me if you want, or you don't have to, but, and I can't see any of you. So first sort of rule is, if I'm going to stretch my head and neck to my left, if I'm going to be stretching muscles with this motion, anything in this direction, I should feel stretching on my right side. So that's the first clue. If I stretch to the left, whether I'm stretching this way or this way or this way, or doing any kind of stretch in the left direction, I should feel stretching on the right, if my goal is to muscle stretch muscles on my right. So if I turn my head and tip and look and try to stretch in this direction, and I feel a pinching discomfort or a stretching pain on my left side, then I'm not accomplishing what I'm trying to do. Then I'm probably causing some compression of some sort on sensitive structures on the wrong side. So there's my first red flag. Then I'm not ready for that stretch, or I need to change the position in order to make it more effective, or not do it at all, and something else. I need to be taught something else to do to stretch my neck. So to do the upper trap, I would tip my head, ear goes towards my left shoulder. I look down towards my left thigh. My fingertips are holding on to the chair. And then I start to turn my eyes to the right. Then I bring my hand over top and give a little gentle overpressure to get a little bit more side bending, or left ear to left shoulder. So that's a lot of steps, right? Most people don't get that. And it requires a good amount of motion for me to start to feel a stretch in the right spot, which is exactly right here. You can actually see it. You can actually see the muscle stick out. So If I can't take a pen and mark specifically, yes, I feel this stretch right here, and kind of knowing where this muscle goes from here all the way up to the top of the skull or the bottom of the skull, then I'm likely not doing it right, or it's not effective for some reason. So you can see how it's easy to do that one wrong. So now, similar thing, I'm going to do the levator stretch, which is just the same. It's a different muscle, but it has some of the same functions. It's just a little bit more on the back. It's a little more towards the back because it attaches to your shoulder blade. So if I tip, I'm going to lean. I'm going to tip my left ear to my left shoulder. I'm going to turn my head down as if I'm looking in my left armpit. And by now, I already feel the stretch. And I don't really need to give this extra pressure because I already feel this stretch there. And I feel it on my right side. I don't feel any pinching on the left side. So then that's probably an okay stretch for me to do. But again, most people don't get that right the first time. The other thing, common mistake with these are when people are trying to use the arm or the opposite hand to give a little bit of overpressure to increase that stretching sensation, they end up pushing down, which is not what we want in a sensitive neck. When we push down on the neck, we're causing compression. We're loading those structures more. And those sensitive structures don't feel good with load. Most of the time, we're trying to unload those structures. So the purpose of this stretching the muscle is to take pressure off of the spine. So if we're stretching in a way that we're putting pressure on the spine, we're not getting what we want out of it. So this is the last piece that I might add to somebody. So again, for levator stretch, I'm going to fingertips on the bottom of the chair. I'm going to tip to my left, ear goes towards my left, angle my eyes towards my armpit. And once I lean a little bit to my left, that's plenty of stretch there. And I can hold that for 30 seconds or so and get a good lengthening of that muscle. So if I turn and try to do these stretches and I feel that pinching on that side, then I need some other kind of treatment, or I need some other kind of stretching ideas, or some other ways to get the neck itself to be more mobile and flexible to even tolerate the stretch. So that's kind of my summary on why I don't teach those stretches right away. And if and when I do, it's kind of after the person really has a better understanding of what they're supposed to be feeling. So that is the neck stretches. I end up teaching those at the end of their course of treatment as opposed to at the beginning. And it's just something that people find everywhere. And so they end up a lot of times making themselves worse or irritated. Okay, so the third question was why I don't teach range of motion. So this is another very common exercise that people are given when they go to therapy or the doctor. They're given their papers of exercises and they're told to do this one where they turn and they turn and they're told to push at the end, and or maybe they go to the side. So there's rotation, side bending, extension, flexion. Those are the main motions that people might be given those handouts to do these range of motion exercises. So similar reasons. If I don't understand when I turn, what am I trying to accomplish with this? Yeah, maybe my complaint is I can't turn to look when I'm driving, or I can't sleep with my head turned to the right, or whatever the person's complaint of restriction in motion, they can't move a certain way, Or maybe they've been given the exercises just because they came for neck pain and that's the neck program they get. So it's not very specific to me. So I want to know why the person can't turn. And I want to know, how can we make it more comfortable to turn? Do they not turn because it hurts, or do they not turn just because it stops and it doesn't turn? So there's a lot that goes into why we don't move a certain way. So just to give somebody, to make them do these motions and push, is kind of like getting way ahead of the process. So here are some things to think about when you are trying to move in certain directions, similar to the stretching. So if I turn, I'm going to use rotation as the example. If I turn to the right and I give a little, and I stop, it doesn't go any further than that. And I don't feel any pain right now. And if I want to make it more flexible, and I give a little overpressure, I start to feel some discomfort on my right side. Okay, so I'm going to the right. I feel discomfort on the right. So that's somewhat of a clue that I'm stretching a joint a little bit. So then I have to ask myself, is that a painful feeling that I really shouldn't be pushing into, or is that a deep stretching feeling that it's okay for me to push into? And when you stretch a joint, when you get to the end of a motion and you're stretching a joint, it's a very different sensation than when you're stretching a muscle. So when I stretch a muscle, it's a very specific sensation. It goes across the whole anatomy of the muscle. It feels more superficial, and it's a familiar stretch. When I push this way, I can feel that I'm stretching a joint at the very top of my neck somewhere. And it's a deep sensation. It's not pinching. If it's a pinching sensation, it's not good. If you're feeling pain referring down the arm, shoulder, hand, that's not good either. You should feel a localized stretch on the same side that you're pushing to, usually, not always. Then that's an indication that you're getting a little bit of a joint stretch. So similar, side bending would be a similar thing. So if I want to stretch in side bending, so a typical range of motion handout would say, tip your ear down and push down. Well, we know from what we just talked about with the stretching, if I need to be super light on the fingers for one thing, so I'm not compressing my neck. And if I bring the ear down towards the shoulder, I need to pay attention to, where do I feel this? I feel some stretching here. So at the moment, this is probably okay for me. I'm feeling a little bit of muscle stretch on this side. I don't feel any pinching. I don't feel any pain referring down my arm, my shoulders, my upper back. So this is probably an okay stretch for me right now. And I come back up. So if I felt a lot of pinching on this side I'm stretching to, then that's probably pinching some sensitive structures on this side. So if I do the range of motion exercises in sitting, the other thing that makes it more aggressive is just the weight of the head. So simply by sitting, I have the weight, my head weighs at least 10 pounds. Just by sitting, I have gravity pushing down on my neck. So the most irritating thing to structures in the neck is compression. So knowing that, and I have a stiff neck and a painful neck, and I'm trying to make it more mobile and flexible, if I'm doing it in a position that I have the weight of my head giving compression, and B, if I haven't done my vertical lengthening and gotten in my ideal posture, then I shouldn't be pushing in any direction. So the solution is to start the range of motion exercises laying down. So I'm going to show you that. And so the first thing is, just by taking the weight of your head off of your spine, you're now able to, so just by eliminating gravity, the gravity of the weight of your head, you are able to minimize the compression in the joints in your neck. And then when you try to move a little bit, then you will more likely get the therapeutic benefit of the gentle joint movement. Okay. So if I come up here, now when I'm laying on my back up here, not everybody can lay with their head flat. So if I'm laying here, I've got ear lined up with shoulder. Not everybody does. So you have to accommodate what your body is capable of. So if this is too much of a stretch or discomfort, then you need to put some pillow or a towel support under your head to put you in whatever your best position is. Now, if I start my range of motion exercises from here, I like to start them here. I take the weight of the head off the body, and now I can turn, just doing gentle rotation without the pressure of gravity. And I can do some repetition with very little effort. So now gravity is kind of helping me turn my head. I can keep my head pretty centered on my body, so that I'm truly pivoting it to the left, to the middle, to the left, to the middle. So I can get some repetition when we're trying to lubricate joints, stretch joints, heal joints by way of movement. Movement is the treatment. Then we want repetition. We want to gently make that fluid move in the joint. So just doing that gentle repetition and range of motion, always thinking, where do I feel it stopping me? I feel stretching on my left side right now. It feels gentle. It doesn't feel sharp. It doesn't feel pinchy. Nothing's referring down. So then it's probably an okay movement for me. Now here I can give a little bit of overpressure so that I can gain a little bit of motion without the pressure of gravity and the weight of my head and all of that. I can also do side bending from here, like this. I'm thinking about bringing ear towards shoulder. And it's okay that it doesn't, I'm not trying to be way over here. I'm actually trying to pivot through my nose here, so that I'm just getting a little bit of motion like this. So I'm left side bending. I'm exercising the joints in a way that they're gently getting range of motion without too much compression. And that's where I would start my range of motion exercises for people, because it's a lot less pressure and a lot less compression. The other benefit to doing the range of motion laying down like that is it takes work off the rest of your body, so you don't have to work so hard or think so much about what holding your posture. So because the common mistakes are to be in the wrong postural position, it takes a little bit of pressure off of that, maintaining the posture perfectly. So those are the three: why I don't like chin tucks, why I don't give out stretches right away, and why I don't give range of motion in sitting right away. So I'm hoping to, I think I kept that pretty succinct. I'm hoping to answer some questions. So I'm going to look in the chat box to see if there's any questions. Are there certain diagnoses that I work with? Well, in the past and the present, a lot of issues people have with their necks that I've worked with: herniated discs, pinched nerve, general neck pain, general complaints of stiffness, people who don't move as well as they'd like to move. So they have complaints like just not being able to manage driving very well because they don't feel they have the freedom of movement to look in different directions. Herniated disc or pinched nerves where they have pain down the arm and weakness in the arm. The compression on the nerve is so bad that the arm is weak. And so they come to me for trying to resolve some of those issues. Those are some primary examples. I know you guys have other questions. What exercises, let me ask you guys a question. What exercises have you been given that you weren't sure you were doing correctly? Are there any exercises that you found on the internet, or you found that you thought might be good, but you weren't sure because it didn't exactly feel real good? Okay. At the start of the presentation, you mentioned the upper back and your core. Do you recommend working on other areas of the body, even if the head and neck are the problem areas? Okay, that's a good question. So that's that's another strategy I use when someone has neck pain, especially when there's pain. So looking at the regions above and below the issue. So in order to master the vertical lengthening posture, you have to have the right amount of flexibility in your lumbar spine and your low back. You have to have the right amount of flexibility in your hips. You have to have the right amount of flexibility in your upper back, in your thoracic area, and your upper neck. So these different areas have to have the right amount of mobility to even attain the vertically lengthened posture. And you have to have the right amount of mobility in all those regions, but you also have to have the right amount of muscle strength in order to maintain the posture. So I have to have the right amount of muscle strength in my core and my abdomen in order to sustain the posture that I'm able to get in. So muscles have to have the right endurance. The core muscles, the lumbar muscles, the upper back muscles are very commonly weak. So we have to do things to make them have more strength and endurance to what I call a postural endurance or postural strengthening endurance, so that once we attain the position that takes pressure off of our neck where we have pain, then we need to have the mobility to get in the position. We need to have the strength to get in the position. And then we need to have the endurance to maintain the position. And then we have to, it's a tall order. We have to have the mobility to get in and out of that position and use it functionally. Aha. So this person is asking about, they had a pinched nerve. They had numbness in the thumb and the first two fingers, which is usually C6. That's gone, but now I get pain at the bottom of my skull and the bottom of my neck with mild headaches. The neck is still very stiff. Do I need a shot? So that's a great question. That scenario I've seen many hundreds of times. So your body was healing. It healed enough to get the numbness, the nerve calmed down enough to fix the finger issue. But during that time, you probably got stiffer than you normally were because your body was protecting itself, and that's kind of what it has to do to heal that nerve, especially if there was that bad of a nerve pinch and the disc was pushing on the nerve. It needs to sort of constrict itself to heal. So now you're left with some stiffness that isn't resolved yet. So, and specifically bottom of the skull. So usually when people have, it's a very common pattern for people to have a lot of stiffness very, very close to the skull. So right up in here, that's usually your suboccipital muscles. So those are muscles that are really focused right here. And sometimes you can get compression here of an occipital nerve, which can be occipital neuritis, suboccipital neuritis, which can give headaches. And that's usually that pinch. That's actually a pinching of a nerve superficially through the muscles. And it actually gives pain kind of coming around the skull like this, usually. But a shot is usually targeting a very specific structure for inflammation. So shots usually are most effective for when someone has a very specific nerve that is causing their problems, or a very specific facet joint that's causing their problems. A facet joint is like one of these guys. So when a specific structure is super inflamed and that's the main problem, that's when I see the most success when people go get injections. When you have generalized stiffness or pain that is from generalized stiff joints and stiff muscles, that's when I don't see as much success with those injections. So usually those people respond better to stretching, some self-stretching, some stretching from a skilled manual therapist type person that understands exactly where your stiffness is coming from. So I would suggest starting with some of the self stretches, even the ones we did today, you could try to help alleviate some of your stiffness. And then, if that doesn't resolve your issue, then you need someone who has some skill in manual therapy to evaluate exactly where the stiffness is coming from. And I wouldn't jump to asking for injections real fast. But as always, consult with your doctor. That was a good question. I hope I answered that. Someone I follow said to put neck in the chin tuck position and then flex and extend in that position. Would you agree with that if I am vertically correct? Put neck in chin tuck position and then extend, and then flex and extend in that position. Okay, so the recommended exercise may be something like chin tuck and then flexion, extension, or keep the chin tucked and then extend. So that's a very good question. You have to think about what you're trying to do. What are you trying to accomplish? So I'm guessing the person who recommends to do it this way is wanting to isolate the motion better. So if I put myself in a chin tuck and I try to flex, then actually that does give my sequence of flexion, makes it actually better. So because when we flex, we want to get motion from all the links in the chain. So if I flex like this, that's no good, right? Because I'm extended here and I'm flexed here. So that's not really flexing the whole spine. If I want to gain flexion, I would want to gain upper flexion and then all the way down the chain. So their recommendation is to do the chin tuck first and then start to flex, which kind of gives the same effect. Yeah, I just wouldn't phrase it that way. I just wouldn't ask someone to pull back and then start to look down. I would ask them to lengthen. I think in the flexion one, if you're in the vertically, to answer it more directly, if you're in the vertically lengthened position, I think for flexion, that's pretty good. That's going to give you a better, it's going to make you use the upper first, which is a good thing. In extension, what that's doing in extension is making you extend more below. So it kind of depends on what your neck needs. So for extension, I wouldn't do it that way. I wouldn't do it that way. Yeah, I wouldn't do extension that way. These are good questions. So extension, I want to talk about that more because extension is a very tricky motion. And you'll notice I didn't even talk about extension when I was doing side bending and rotation, because extension is a very common movement that people tend to it's not comfortable. It hurts. And that's because in extension, we close down all these spaces. So everything gets smaller in extension. So here's our facet joints. Here's our foramen where all these sensitive structures come out. When we extend, like by normal mechanics, all these spaces get smaller. So it's a very common position to aggravate things. So I very seldom ask people to extend directly on their cervical spine, because I'm trying to get them to utilize their upper to get that motion from their upper and from their upper back, so then when I want to actually functionally extend, actually look up or change a light bulb or do something above my head, it's not really necessary for me to extend my head like this. So like this to me is a bad position. This is not really a healthy position to hang out in. So if I'm going to do something above my head, I'm trying to teach people how to utilize their upper cervical, utilize their upper back, and then I'm not so closing down in that middle. So actually, I could use the chin tuck extension sort of, I'm just maintaining neutral in my upper. Instead of thinking chin tuck, I'm thinking neutral, and then utilizing the other parts to extend. So yeah, so kind of some play on words with some of that. I've been stretching a lot, not working. Posture correction has helped the most. Yep. Had traction at PT and all the nerve pain returned that night and then went away. Huh. So do I recommend traction? Yes, I recommend traction a lot. So traction is like the number one most effective self-treatment, treatment in clinic, treatment from therapists, because it opens those spaces and allows healing to happen within those spaces. It creates space for the nerves. If we have swelling, it can help reduce the swelling by moving fluid. So there's lots of different ways to get traction. there is some ways I teach people to do traction themselves at home with some homemade devices that I teach people how to make. There is some units that I recommend to people that are there's one that I think is a good choice. The old-fashioned ones that are from the door that you're sitting, I don't recommend those, because those, I don't think you should be doing it in sitting, because it's too hard to relax the muscles and open the spaces. But traction is just like any other treatment. It can be done in a way that causes things to get worse. The most common reason things get worse with traction is there's too much force, and there's a muscular response in the neck, kind of a rebound muscular response to it. And then the muscular response then causes compression again. That would be the most common scenario, where giving yourself a self-treatment kind of traction, or an in-clinic kind of treatment traction, that's the most common reason that it doesn't end up feeling good. And that just comes across, yes, Bill, I will send that. I will put that traction device that I recommend in the follow-up emails. The one I'm talking about, it allows you to lay down, and it allows you to, it cradles your skull, your occiput, in a way that you can genuinely relax, truly relax, because if the muscles in your neck aren't relaxed, you're not going to get the traction. It takes very little muscle contraction to push your bones back together. So yeah, I didn't want to include something like that in a webinar, because that's kind of more of a pretty specific thing to, in terms of teaching someone how to do it. That's a pretty specific thing to learn and understand what you're supposed to feel. But yeah, in general, that's a very viable treatment that I use a lot. So, any other questions? Those were good questions, and it helps me to formulate other ways of presenting this type of material. So thank you for that. You will get an automated recording on your emails. I'm going to stop the recording.